Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Whiskey Neat, spirited conversations with interesting people. I am your host, Kristopher Hart. Yeah! We should throw some sound effects in here sometime, just like a little, yeah, audience thing. Never mind. This week is kind of interesting, so I'm having to try to relive an intro we did a couple weeks ago. My completely piece of shit producer deleted or lost the intro we did for this episode. Yeah, so we have to redo the intro for this, but it's okay. This episode was probably easily my favorite episode I've done on location, even better than a past episode we did with a certain boxing celebrity movie guy from the 80s. This episode we did was so much fun. There's been this extreme uprising in geographical indications, GIs, that are trying to be rolled out in the Caribbean right now for Jamaica, Barbados, a bunch of other places. They're trying to institute these rules centered around rum. Rum has traditionally, the saying with rum is that rum has no rules. And it's a complete false statement, but it's kind of like the mentality with a lot of people that rum has no rules. You can do whatever you want. You can add sugar. You can do this. You can do that. And so there's a bit of a trouble brewing in the Caribbean, so to speak. And Alexandre Gabriel, who's been on the show before, I'm a huge fan of the guy. I love the guy. He couldn't be a nicer guy. I couldn't be a bigger fan. He has done the show before, wanted to come to Houston and kind of give people a chance to have a town hall style meeting, town hall style taping in which people can ask him questions that they want answered in regards to his perspective on the GI and things he wants to allow to happen and things he doesn't want to allow to happen. He agreed graciously to come on my show, and we put him to the ringer a little bit, pushed back on a few of his stances just to kind of really understand him. And I think some of my questions might have come off rude unintentionally. He was very gracious, but I definitely, I want people to understand his perspective because there tends to be, anytime there's a political environment with anything, both sides are kind of hated in some regard to some extent, for whatever reason. And I wanted to give people that shot. So this is a follow-up interview. We did the Richard Seal interview a couple weeks ago. This one is the Alexandre Gabriel response for Plantation Rum, who is known to do something called Dosage. Dosage is a barrel-aged sugar syrup water that they put into some of their bottlings of rum, and that could be perceived as controversial. So it was an eye-opening interview, I thought. We were also joined by the incredible Russell from Lei Low Rum Bar in Houston. Lei Low is probably, arguably, top for many people, top rum bar in Houston. Really, really great rum bar, great rum selection, great guy, incredibly intelligent. And again, he agreed to let us come film at his location, and it was amazing. So I thank everybody for being involved. I thank Greg Doxakis, the pilot episode, one of my favorite people ever, Greg Doxakis, huge fan of his. I was very, very thankful for him to let this happen. So without further ado, this week's show is, as always, sponsored by Terlato Distell Artisan Spirits, leader in premium products like Bunnahabhain, Deanston, Ledaig, Tobermory, Bains, Black Bottle, and Scottish Leader. I am getting the hang of it. You can pick up the entire line at your local liquor store, or if you are a retailer, reach out to your United Wine and Spirits rep. Shout out to United Wine and Spirits. I am a huge fan of them and the people who run the company. Couldn't be a bigger fan. So, without further ado, Alexandre Gabriel. We're not doing the episode here. We actually did it on location, so I don't know why I'm pointing here, but typically the main guy goes there. Without further ado, Alexandre Gabriel and Russell from Lei Low in Houston. Cheers. And thank you for doing this, by the way. So
pleasure. Always good to see you when I'm
when you're in town.
Here in Texas. Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful.
Well, I know that it seems over the past, I'd say it's fair to say over the past 8 months, the fervor and the tension has been kind of building, at times overflowing, and you kind of catch the brunt of that at times. And this is a great opportunity for us to kind of clear the air. And I started watching. You did a great panel at Tales, and I started watching it. I haven't quite finished it yet, but you kind of got a chance to speak on your behalf about your feelings and everything. And so I imagine you're going to have to repeat a little bit of that here. But this is our first live audience, this is our first live taping, which I'm kind of horribly nervous at. But yeah, so what we'll do, just for those listening at home, we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to kind of get some basis of I did a podcast or an episode with Richard Seale last week, and we kind of heard his feelings on everything as far as the GI and the different levels of adulteration and things that they'd like to incorporate. And I aired that Friday so that people can kind of hear a little bit of that backstory, and then this would be the nice follow-up to hear your side of it separately. And then we've got some Twitter questions. We'll go through our tweets intermittently and kind of field some questions at you and let you run with it. Does that sound good?
Cool.
I'm definitely going to need a drink first, so let's do this real quick. Oh, that's good. That's good rum. Is this Foursquare? I'm just kidding. So
from Jamaica,
yeah. Russell, by the way, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Russell.
No, thank you. Thanks for doing it here. This is an exciting time for rum. It's really cool. Thank you everybody that came.
Absolutely.
It's really cool. No one else has done an interview with Richard Seale and Alexander back to back. I think this is it's really awesome to have two different perspectives, and to hear two different perspectives of an industry. It means that we're growing. It means that there's room for innovation, those kind of things. So awesome.
Well, now is the time. I mean, with I wouldn't say it's unprecedented. I mean, rum's been loved for many generations, but what rum is going through right now is very comparable, in my opinion, to the bourbon boom a few years ago. Everyone is going a bit fanatic for rum, and I think it's arguably fair to say that Plantation is definitely a household name within bars, the bar scene, the cocktail scene, and of course groups like the Houston Bourbon Society and some other ones that are fans of Plantation rum. So I say we jump right into it. I'd like to hear. I kind of pitched the same question at Richard: is what the basis of the GI is, and what your what your idea of being included in the GI, meaning your motivation. Like, this is the GI. This is what we'd like to roll out. You're trying to work with the GI, and you want these aspects incorporated, and then we'd like to hear why. Does that sound fair?
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. By the way, thank you to be here. It's a great pleasure. I try to come once a year in Texas. It's always a great pleasure. So, the GI, we have to remember what it should serve. It should serve, it's here to serve and to protect a product from a specific origin. GI, as you all know, stands for geographical indication. And it is here to create that. And it should, in my point of view, also leaving room for rum to continue to blossom. So I'm telling you this because I sit on the board of the GI for cognac as well back in France. And cognac is an AOC. The regulation for making cognac is 23 pages long. And we feel that it needs to evolve, and it was done at a certain time, was put together in 1945, and then there's certain evolutions that are needed, and it takes a long time. So when I look at this, I'm going to give you a very straightforward example. We have found some documents. I've just finished a book on the history of the Grand Champagne of Cognac. It's going to be out in December, about going through the history of that Premier Cru de Cognac, the bullseye of the Cognac region. And we discovered so many things doing this research, going back to like hundreds of years about the way cognac was made. And it's really inspiring to see that these great spirits are been always alive and moving forward, with people waking up in the morning wanting to make products that are delicious and wanting to make a difference. So you need, the way I look at it, and I'll give you an example. For example, cognac right now, since 1945, says it's aged in an oak barrel. Now, we know now that a lot of the cognacs back in the old days were aged, for example, in chestnut, acacia, mulberry barrel. Now, we can't do it anymore. And I asked the question, is that a good thing? And I kind of answered the question by aging cognac in these, tried to answer that question, so modestly, by aging cognac in this type of ancient woods. and they are sustainable. That's very important every time when you use a wood to make sure they are sustainable. And some of these expressions are delicious. Yet we cannot sell it as cognac anymore.
Renegade number 2.
The Renegade number 2 is,
in
chestnut barrel. And so that kind of raises a lot of questions. So to tell you what's our philosophy and what I'm sharing with you guys here is not only, what I think, it's really the whole team back at West Indies Rum Distillery and the whole team at Maison Ferrand. We really see eye to eye, and we've got a great technical team there. And to me, there's really 4 things we should keep in mind and to protect. A is be true to the cane. We distill from cane, whether it is the syrup, the juice, or the molasses, and you want elements of that to be in what you're drinking. So that sounds crazy and stupid, but that means that if you distill too high proof, you guys tried the chamber Vulcan still, you got this molasses right there for you, right? It's almost creamy, right? Mm-hmm. So that's respecting the cane. But
just to clarify, step by step, everyone's in agreement with this, right? There's no disagreement in the Caribbean community of what this first point, correct?
Yeah. Well, let me elaborate on this. So, if you're adding something to your rum, it should be related to the cane. So, for example, some people use caramel, and it's made with sugar beet, and we would disagree with that. A lot of caramel made in Europe is made with sugar beet. And so if you go true to the cane, respecting the cane, I think you should really drill down into this. So that's important. The use of sugar, it's been a big debate. If you're interested, I brought some slides over there to show historical documents. For people who really want to geek out, there's a book I'd really recommend. It's, to me, the best book ever written about spirits. It's called The Royal Commission to Whiskey and Other Potable Spirits. During the break, I can give you actually I have one. It's 800 pages. It's a little thick, but it's incredible because this is different spirit producers that are there to express how they make their spirits in 1908, and they're being interrogated by the British government there, trying to understand what we're going to do with this type of, with whiskey and so on. So you have Monsieur Hennessy telling you about, cognac. You have Mr. James J.C. Nolan telling you about Jamaican whiskey, Jamaican rum. And so that's kind of exciting book because you see how it's done. And when you look at this, you see that, for example, the word you were talking about, there was a word you were using, adulteration. The word adulteration is actually quite defined in this document. It is adding a spirit from a different source inside a cane spirit or a grape spirit. Adulteration was not putting caramel into or sugar. Adulteration was actually
like
using
cognac finishes or Madeira finishes.
No. Adulteration was to add, like, for example, beet spirit into rum. That was something that was done in the old days, or and that was an adulteration.
Plum wine.
Right.
No, it was to use another spirit in the spirit itself. So dilute it down. So, for example, if you have a cognac, during phylloxera, for example, you had cognac, and cognac was made, as you know, it's wine that's distilled. So if you use neutral spirit, that's beet spirit into it, that was called adulteration. That was the way it was.
Historically, that's not how we're using it nowadays.
Yeah, well, I'm just telling you what's the history and what's, what the historical facts. So to go back to that, so for us, being true to the cane is that and in the old days, and I'll show you some slides if you're interested, again, that's history, and, the caramel that was used was made on premise. We have a cauldron to make caramel at West Indies rum, but it's not unique. You have the guys in Angostura, they still make the caramel. You got the guys at DDL, they still make the caramel. You have the guys you got a few other producers, for example, Barbancourt, they still make their caramel. And in the old days, the way they made the caramel, they didn't burn the sugar totally. They made caramel the way you think of caramel. So we're arguing this is interesting, this is heritage, this is something that we should be able to keep alive. And that's our position. That's true to us, that's true to the cane, if it's made with the cane. So it's not only something we all agree on, actually some of this, we're not all in agreement with that.
Sure.
The second point that I think is very important, and there's 4 points I think that should really be driving what should be doing, and it's our compass, by the way, is that we should be transparent. Like, if you think tropical aging is wonderful, and we think it's great, we age, we have quite a few barrels in Jamaica and Barbados, then put it on the label. I think it's wonderful.
And you actually do.
Yeah.
One of the things...
We put everything on the label, and if it's not on the label, because we're in a process of reprinting. You go on our website and it's all there. I think we should even put, I have a mother who's an artist and really new age, and she really wants to want anything we drink and we eat and so on. And so I think we should put calories, and we don't put it yet, but it's all on our website. And so I think it should be there. So if you believe like us that tropical aging is great, but double aging is also something that's super interesting, then just be transparent about it and then let the consumer decide. And very often you'll see the consumer saying, you know, like what you have behind your bar, you actually will have both.
Right.
Because we think that's the beauty of rum. And this, I have heard somebody saying, no, we want to reverse the history on this one. I'm like, there's no reversing of the history. History is history.
Right.
You know, we're not reversing history. So for us, that transparency is crucial. And the third aspect, and I go to 4 of them, that's my answer about the principles, the way we look at GI. The third aspect is to learn about these past practices. Early on, wonderful team here, I showed you, what is a chamber still, a Vulcan still, and you tasted the rum it makes. I mean, you tell me, should we just erase this and say, let's forget about it? Or should we make it part of the GI?
So you're wanting to allow not only column and pot still, but a Vulcan still.
Chamber still.
Right.
Of course. Oh, you tell me.
No, I'm just clarifying. Yeah.
But what do you think?
I mean, I have always argued that I think as long as there, especially, and I had this discussion with Richard last week, that historical precedents, if it was shown to be a habit, it's not necessarily a bad thing. His point was simply that just because it happened in one incident, or just because it happened, one guy was doing this one thing, doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be in the GI. My frustration, as you can see with some geographical indicators, is the German beer law. The German purity laws have prevented progress in that realm of beer. It's not all German beer tastes the same, before anyone murders me. But
You're gonna get in trouble.
American craft beer, I think, has shown that you can do anything and make some pretty not all of it's good. But I mean, I get the argument that being too restrictive prevents growth potentially. But where's that line? So that's I'm more of clarifying your stance. I don't think there necessarily has to be anything restrictive in the type of pot still, but I'm also, it's not my community, it's not my culture, my opinion means nothing. It's more like trying to find a middle ground between two passionately outspoken individuals that have really made their voice heard. It seems like every panel I've seen you on with Richard and with every other person, even Luca, it seems to be really passionately driven by two individuals on the panel, and the rest are just kind of silently in agreement at times, that they don't seem to be as outspoken. And
well, I'm part of the technical committee at the WESPA, West Indies Rum and Spirit Association. We meet every 6 months. It's a terrific organization. And every 6 months, all the master blenders, master distillers meet. That was 2 weeks ago in Grenada. Wonderful, wonderful meeting. And so there's a lot of voices out there from the guys who make the rum every day. And so, and there's a lot of diversity in rum that I think we need to protect. So that's why I'm asking the question to everybody here. It's like, you've tasted a chamber still, rum. That was made at West Indies Rum from the 30s to 2000, right? Should we just dump it? Or should we protect this and be allowed to do so? And not only that, if somebody else wants to buy one and distill in Barbados, shouldn't they be allowed to be able to use it? And that's the question about studying these ancient practices and making sure that they don't occur in one instances, but there is some stability in them. And I think that's really important. Another big issue is the use of wood. I see a nice oak barrel here. Should we limit ourselves to oak? Or should we open ourselves to other type of wood?
So sorry to interrupt you, but in your opinion, where would that line be then? If you're open to wood and you're open to different chamber, different types of stills, where for you would be that line that you say enough is enough?
Well, to me, remember what I said earlier, respect the cane. So when you do a distillation method, you want to make sure you don't distill too high. Everybody's familiar, right? The higher you distill, the less elements you're going to have from the original material that it's still distilled from. So I really think we should be able to distill in a way that, so we should put a threshold, whether it is 95, 96, etc. I think that's high already, but that's what it's important. After that, the distilling equipment should be, I'm okay with, pot still. I'm okay with column still. I'm even okay, that was an effort on my part, a hybrid stills, which is like a column on top of a pot. And if it's called a hybrid, and some of them do great rum, I have no problem with that. And we're showing part of the history and the heritage that I think is fascinating. I can't help it. I wake up in the morning. That's what makes me going, is producing these rums. You've tasted it, the creaminess and so on. And I would never want to give that up. And that's, if you ask me the question on this, that's what it is. My take about wood is the same thing. We found documents from a botanist from Jamaica that listed in the 19th century all the type of woods that was in the Caribbeans and what they were used for. And there was 40 varieties of wood, and 6 of them were used to fix barrels. And we discovered that, of course, I'm going to make some people scream, but I'm telling you what this guy is saying. There was a tradition where people were fixing barrels using mango wood, the caps, the stave that were broken. And the guy who runs the distillery, Andrew, says, Alexander, we're planting mango tree for the future, for our children, so it's sustainable. And maybe in the meantime, we're going to see it, we're going to try it. So, in the end, if you're transparent, if there's a certain heritage, my finding, I've been doing this job for 30 years this year. My finding is that I have somebody by my side that's a PhD, that works with me, that's from my village, that researched these techniques so we can get inspiration from them. And I think it's fascinating. And my finding is if somebody was doing it for more than 20 or 30 years, you ought to really look at it. So my third point is really learn from these traditions, from the ancient techniques, and learn from one another. I learn from other people all the time. And then you say, you know what? I saw this guy, I was with Garrett from Brooklyn Brewery. You were talking about beer. Couple of days ago, we had dinner together, and we're going to do some projects about swapping barrels together. I'm sure our marketing department is going to be upset at me that I told you this, but and we're going to do something quite intricate. And I've learned a lot, and spending time with him.
You're open to it,
very open. So that's true. And the last point, remember what you said, and that's my fourth point. And you'll see everything we're going to talk about is going to revolve through that compass. The cane, the transparency, the heritage, and the diversity, and last one, leave room for creativity. There's, for example, some guys that are barrel makers. They created a vat that's 2,000 liters, and it's a vat that's shaped like an egg. What it does is that the egg is a perfect vessel to have something that moves, with the differences of temperature. So your rum in it has like a natural movement, and you create what we call fondu, the integration. Now, these guys, this is a total innovation. Nobody made, they make only 4 a year right now. It's kind of high tech. You need guys that are really, really fine hands. They're like surgeons of barrel making. I went and bought an egg, and it's fascinating. I want to be able myself, but also I have a son who is interested by this. I don't want these guys to be handcuffed and not be able to do this. So I really like your question. Of course, there's a fine line, and you don't want people to start distilling, a rum from sugar beet, or, there should be, and you want what's on the label to be true, and you want, if it's from Barbados, that it's fermented and distilled in Barbados, that it's used Barbados water to make the products, to make the rum. This is what we think is important. But I just wanted, and thank you to be patient with me, but I just wanted to explain what are the four key points that are really a guide for us at West Indies Rum and at Plantation. When we look at something, we always look at it through that lens to say, does that respect? Is it transparent? Is it something? What are we learning right now? Some of you might have heard that Matt Pietrek, who's cocktail wonk and rum wonk, has finished a book on Navy rum and dark rums. And I've learned great stuff reading it. Incredible stuff about all the box that Navy rum was ticking. And this is something that I find extremely inspiring and humbling. You say, wow, they were actually doing things about open top vatting, gravity vatting which I find is fascinating, and we should be able to do these things. That's my answer to your question here.
Well, I wanted to give that foundation before we got into some questions. I wanted to give Russell a chance. Did you have a question you wanted to ask in 10?
Well, I have a few questions, but really, do you know where that tradition of adding sugar, or some places they add actual molasses, right? Where did that come from? I know in the Demerara Valley they like to add molasses, and it's always been a part of their rum. Do you know where that originated?
Alors, if you're interested, that would be taking a long time. The slides that you see there, I can leave them here. There's like 6 or 7 slides that actually show you this. These are 19th century documents that show that in the old days, when reference is made to caramel, it was actually not a caramel like industrial caramel where you burn the caramel to carbon. Mm-hmm. It was when you think about caramel, think about it, or pastry, whatever. When caramel is done, you have a certain level of residual sugar. So I'll show you these documents. These are not one document. When one guy found a document, there's like 5 or 6 here. Sure. When they say, when you make your caramel, make sure you don't burn the sugar all the way. Leave some sweetness to the caramel. Mm-hmm. So
historically, it's not been just added color. It's actually added quite a bit of sweetness.
Absolutely. And not a huge amount, because, it was not like, where we have, I don't know if you guys saw, but Europe has put a cap on the level of obscuration. Sure. You guys are familiar with the obscuration? The obscuration is the difference between the apparent proof and the real proof, which shows you anything that is not alcohol and water. So it comes from caramel, it comes from the wood compound. And so it fixed a limit at 20, the equivalent of 10, 20 grams, which is 5, of obscuration. And I agree with this, because it's a matter of balance. Mm-hmm. But the historical evidence about this was the fact, and we have quite a few documents here that I brought to show that, the caramel that was used was not something that was industrial, which was fully burned, but they were caramel that were actually handmade, on premise from sugar from the island, where there were actually residual sugar in it. And that's a historical fact. I totally respect the fact people say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. Sure. That's okay. I think the beauty of rum is that. But we cannot say it didn't exist, it doesn't exist, and so on. And you reference to molasses, that also was an instance. Right. Molasses is very technical to reintegrate, but, the caramel that was used, and I'll show you these documents, these evidence, and that's very old practices that were done. Right. And I find them interesting, provided they're done in a in the right way and in a measured way. Right. I don't know if I answered your question, but
I guess so.
We actually had a question tangential to that. Doug Carroll, member of a local bourbon group and huge rum nerd himself, Doug had a question he wanted to ask you in regards to caramel and sugar additives.
I mean, just continue with this point with in regards to the sugar content of the distiller's caramel that's used for the coloring. Just wondering if there's an example of that in the last, say, 50 years of somebody from Jamaica, Barbados, using a caramel that adds sweetness to the spirit, or there's a lot of bottles. There was a Luca Gargano had a bottle of rum from like 1780, which is amazing, and so there's some of these bottles left around, and I wonder if there's any analysis has been done of these older bottles of rum that have shown more than like 5 grams of sugar per liter, because that's usually the limit of the. Usually when you see these things, they say there can be 0 to 5 from wood sugars in the barrel, and residue from even a completely dry old wine barrel that could be up to 5 grams per liter. But beyond that, you're really that's where people start saying, okay, you're really adding sugar to it. But are there any examples of historical rums that are?
There's documents from a distillery, in Barbados, for example, where there was an article in the New York Times when in 1982, the person is explaining that he's using sugar in the form of falernum, for example. Right. So falernum, as you know, is a few hundred grams per liter, so that would use sugar in that case. Sure. So that would be an example, for example, and that's an interview that's given in New York Times in 1982. So I don't know if
that's a rum liqueur, right? I mean, it was made to be a sugary spirit, right? I mean,
but that's added to the rum. That was a way to add sugar to the rum. and
add falernum to the
add falernum to the rum in the rum making. I'll show you the article if you're interested. So that's an evidence. There's not a lot of rum laying around for the last 30 years, 40 years, that we are analyzing. We haven't done tremendous analysis. Mm-hmm. We're looking at what it is. And look, to go back to that, so we're looking at historical evidence where it's either articles or hard documents. Because also when you have, I have a lot of old spirits. This is the article up there, but I have a lot of different spirits that you're testing. And, I've done a lot of these, with cognac, for example. There's a lot of old bottles of cognac laying around. Sure. With rum, you don't know which condition they've been left, but there is serious obscuration that you find in several rums. In the old days, they were not necessarily, I'm going to be very honest with you, we did analysis to them that was not only due to sugar and caramel. There were traditions of adding prune wine and other elements that were creating tremendous obscuration. That's why I'm careful in my answer to you, because if you do a difference between apparent proof and, real proof, you're going to see a distortion that's not necessarily due to just this element, but in the old days there was a lot of other elements, and prune wine or Baccarat would be an example to this. So that's why I'm very careful in the answer that I'm giving you, because we don't know for sure that it was due to the to sugar or to caramel. It could have done. There is definitely obscuration in a lot of old rums, even in the past years. But I cannot say for sure that it was from that, because was from a lot of different things back then.
Yeah, I wonder, you had the Black Tot rum that Chris got these 2-gallon flagons of these, or maybe it's more than that, of these
three
Navy
flagons.
Three flagons.
Before you ask the question,
come a little closer.
Okay, just want to make sure we can hear you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And that rum is very, very flavorful and delicious. This was the stuff that was served to British naval officers. It's very, very dark,
thick,
rich, and it'd be interesting to have a real chemical analysis of that. And how much sugar is
I've
actually
got some
in
that I can provide anyone who's wanted.
I would love to do the test for you. We have found, for example, and when you look at the color, you can imagine that's not from the barrel, right? And so. We have documented, if you look at the book of Mike Pietrek, it remains an open question, is the way that they recommend a high amount of caramel, which, look, we're just giving you facts. I love the debate, by the way, which we think was the caramel that's referenced in all these old documents. And we're saying, that's interesting. That's something we're studying right now. The level of obscuration that's suggested in these documents that shows that if it was just pure burnt sugar, like what we call about the caramel burnt all the way, would have been a tremendous amount because of the gravity, and caramel, when it's burnt sugar, which is not like artisanal caramel, has a very, very important potency in terms of the bitterness that it's going to bring. So if you look at the obscuration that's suggested, you're right, by the way, to believe there's a lot added at that point, a substantial amount, and I think it's delicious, by the way, to be honest with you. I tasted quite a few. But when you look at these recipes and what they're suggesting, you're bound to believe, but carefully, you can argue both sides, that there were residual sugar in it. Now, it wouldn't be in 20 grams in that case. It would probably be around 5, 6, 7 grams, in that very specific point, from what we've read. And I've just read the document and analysis, just fresh into this analysis. So this is what we're looking at right now.
I would think that there's got to be an argument, and I'm willing to hear feedback after the fact. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
I'd be willing to hear I would say that I'm wondering if there's an argument if you could take those old flagons of British naval rum and prove that they were regularly dosed or heavily adulterated, depending on what word you'd like to use. If that could not also be a argument for allowing in a GI. I mean, meaning is historical precedence or historical behavior, does that carry more weight than the way that the current community feels about something? Could you not argue that if it's been done for literally, those flagons were given to naval officers and naval men every single day, if those were dosed, could you not say that that's historical precedence to allow it to happen?
Well, I imagine when a pusser on a ship purchased a barrel of rum in 1820. I imagine that rum was not of the highest quality. It's government level rum. I mean, we have this tradition of loving the tradition of Navy rum, but it wasn't the highest quality of rum. They weren't picking barrels from well-known distilleries at the time. They were buying something that was government funded, so it had to be at the lowest quality. So I imagine they were adding stuff to make it taste better.
I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree here. That was exactly my understanding before I read this book, and I'm saying I was thinking exactly what you just said, by the way. So totally same reasoning. So I'm not going to repeat it. I was just like this, and I start reading the work they were doing to these products. If you want, we can do the boxes, what they were done. For example, they were blending from different origins, little aging at origin, shipped inside barrels. So you have dynamic aging. I don't know if you know, but when you ship a barrel, when it's being ages, it's not faster, but you have esterification.
Sure.
That's very important. Like in 45 days at sea, if some of you are interested, I have some of the slides here. You have the esterification, the esters that are 49 grams per hectoliter of esterification just by shipping at sea, just because of the temperature, the movement, provided it's inside a barrel. So they were going through that process, and then it goes to the British London dock, and then they vat it for 1 to 2 years in open vats with gravity. So these guys, and they bought from distilleries that were pretty reputable back then. The price was important, they were looking, but think about it. At first I started thinking, and I said, actually, that was part of their pay. That was part of their pay, the rum. So you want to be paid by real money, by something of some quality. So there was really a balance between the quality and the price that really mattered. They just didn't buy the cheapest rum that was out there. And by the way, throughout history, you see different. I mean, I encourage you when the book is out, you look at it. It's fascinating. And so they're going through that process, and then they went to vat it. That's to create the fondue and the integration from 1 to 2 years. They didn't have to do this. They could just say, "Hey guys, this is it. We're going to give it to you and just drink it." No, they were actually going through that process.
And we've got to take a quick break, but I want to end on this. I would argue that even if it was in a lower quality rum, I think we could argue that even in whiskey, a protected category like bourbon, even the lower quality bourbons, the number one selling bourbon in the world isn't necessarily something that all of us buy every day, right? It's more of a daily drinker, so to speak, in that category. Even that lower quality or not as good, I would argue that if some regulation came up, that their opinion on the matter would still carry weight. I mean, whether or not it may be to your quality doesn't mean that it shouldn't carry weight in the conversation, so to speak. Sure. So we've got to take a quick break. We'll allow everyone to get some drinks and run to the bathroom, and then we'll be right back. All right. Okay, so where were we? What were we talking about? Sugar, dosage. I had a question going back to Tyler's other question here. Bear with me. He said, ask Alexander if he only uses sugar and caramel produced from grapes for his cognac.
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, no. The way I was taught in cognac, we use actually sugarcane sugars. The sugars from grapes are. It's a very technical question. I like that one because it's a big debate. The sugar that's extracted from grapes, it's a more modern. The extraction of these sugars, this is a technique that we know only for a few decades, right? And so that's not part of the heritage of making it. But to tell you the truth, some people are looking at it right now. And is it good? Is it bad? Again, we're talking about innovation, creativity, but the tradition of doing this for cognac, actually the way I was taught was actually sugarcane for the caramel and for the sugar itself. The way it's done, though, if you want me to give you a little background, is it's not like you take your sugar, like you're using powder sugar, and you put it like you do in your coffee or in your tea. This is the sugars or the caramel is alkalized, meaning that 50-50 alkalized, and it is very often master blender would barrel age it for 1, 2, or 3 years. So actually the cognac, and you have to do this with the same cognac that you've been. You cannot use a younger cognac that what you're going to declare. That's very, very regimented, and it should be. Remember, the age claimed, in that case, the reference VS, VSOP, and so on, is always the youngest of the blend. So in that case, you alkalize your sugar or you alkalize your caramel, and then you age it in a barrel, usually 50-50, and so it's fully digested, it's prepared, and that's used in a minute quantity. The ceiling for in that case is 16 grams per liter by law.
Okay. Does that answer your question? Give or take? All right. Well, I wanted to follow it up with another question. That same thing from Tyler. Great question. Going back to stills, right? So you mentioned that the 1908 Royal Commission, in which J.C. Nolan, the Jamaican commissioner in England, states that anything produced from a coffee still should be considered a spirit, not a rum, meaning a column still. If he leans on the if Alexander leans on the testimony of A.C. Thompson regarding the existence of sugar in rum, why should anything other than a pot still be allowed for rum?
Look, I grew up with pot still all over me, all around me. You know, I have a sweet spot, so to speak, for pot stills for sure. And that was a very humbling experience for me to discover rum many decades ago. Because I was this little guy coming from France, and I'm from redneck country back in France, and I know pot stills, and I know pot stills real well. This is how I've learned to distill. And I see column stills. And to me, I'm very frank with you. Column, I looked at it as a compromise. I was like, really?
Well, the community agrees with you as well. Richard said you can pry my column still from my cold, dead hands. So I think the community is very much in agreement that both pot and column should be allowed. Is that not right?
No, that's not. What I was saying is what happened is that I'm looking at the... at the time, I looked at columns as saying, is that really a compromise? Distilling in the column is cheaper, it's faster. And then I tasted column rum from producers, and it was delicious. So, in the end, it's really like opening your mind. And I always say we say at Ferrand and at Plantation and at West Indies as well, never prejudge before you've done it or you've tried it several times, right? Because I was a guy saying, really, a true spirit, the way I looked at it, and I say that humbly because I was wrong. I thought a true spirit's got to be a pot still. Cognac is 100% pot still. There's no way there's 5,000 pot stills in cognac to be able to distill cognac. 5,000, So, but I arrived in the Caribbean and tasted some delicious rum made with column. So, to me, I think that, Jamaica is interesting. If you read J.C. Nolan's statements, he was a feisty gentleman with very principled gentleman. You don't have to, so you probably read it, from your quotes. I must say I have liking for this guy. I love this passion, and to him, a column spirit, because he didn't call it rum. He called it. You probably remember from the quotes. He called it a silent spirit, and he said, "I will not accept." A rum. For him, adding, that's not me talking here, I'm just quoting J.C. Nolan, adding a column rum inside, or spirit for him, inside to a pot still rum would be an adulteration. That's his term. That's almost quote unquote. And I actually have it in my bag if you want to look at it. So my taking on this, and that's the beauty about the Caribbeans, is that rum should allow pot still, should allow column still, and should allow chamber still. And then, of course, and that's, I think, the heritage of what has happened. Even though, talking about Jamaica, the introduction of column stills in Jamaica is actually the 1960s, 1955. It's a recent, it's very recent in the history of Jamaican rum making. Very recent. If you think of 350 years of history of rum making, that's actually really the few past years. Doesn't make it wrong.
I think if you look at rum history really, we have these stories of what happened in the 1700s and what happened in the 1800s. But what we know is the modern rum industry started around 1908, around 1919. And that was really the introduction of the column still. These places were at this point trying to figure out what they could do with the stuff that they had that was left behind. And newer rum industries were being formed in Puerto Rico, in places that they didn't have stills before. So they didn't have an investment in a pot still. They could reinvest in a column still. And that would start, a whole different spirit. Well, you can't really make a difference between the area there. That's the innovation of the retort, was to try to make it more like a column still, to where it could become more efficient, to where they could compete with these more modern rum industries that were coming in at the time. Like, for instance, Bacardi. Bacardi's growth, they have a date of 1860, but their growth was really after the 1900s that they really started to blow up, And so someone in Jamaica that had 200 years of distilling tradition had to try to compete with, a bigger company. And so that was really that innovation. So I think it is part of the heritage of rum to have both of them, because you can't say someone that's making rum in Puerto Rico is wrong, even though their history is 100 years as well,
That was part of my counter argument before we started recording. We were talking about what some people in the community are trying to do to the labeling of your rums. They're wanting to change it to rum liqueur, right? Or label it as such, based on anything that had dosage in it.
Never heard about that, but
well, that's the argument, is that they're not wanting it to be labeled as Barbadian rum. If there's dosage in it, they're wanting it to be labeled a liqueur.
Okay.
And my argument to that is that if you, knowing plantation bottles from distilleries all over the world, including Fiji, as we also discussed before the show, and if Fiji allows for whatever, let's just say dosage, then you can theoretically have two bottles sitting on a shelf, which is rum with dosage. One's labeled Fiji rum, the other one's Barbados liqueur. It makes it look like it's something else is different to it, versus even though it's simply the same thing, it's rum with dosage. So is there a compromise, as Mr. Wade Woodard mentioned, if 3 of 4 agree? Is there room for a compromise on what you're willing to? Because it seems like you're fighting the front on several.
No, but I mean, a liqueur is a spirit. It contains 100 grams of sugar or more. Most liqueurs on the market are 250 grams or 450 grams, 550 grams. We're talking about total different things. We're talking about, if you talk about Armagnac, if you talk about Calvados, if you talk about, Cognac, if you talk about Aquavit, if you talk about, German brandy, Italian brandy, Spanish brandies, a certain level of dosage, right? And they are not called, liqueurs or whatsoever. So in that case, it's technique. So, no, I don't think it's about calling it a liqueur or whatsoever. I think we had a conversation that I thought was interesting. It's about being transparent. It's about putting it on the label so people know. And in the end, it's about making a delicious product. I think we forget about this, is that let's taste blind and let's say, how does it taste? Is it good? At Plantation, we make rum with dosage. We make rum with no dosage. And I have an equal liking for both.
Right.
And I'd like to be able to continue, because I'm having a great time making great rum. I must say, I wake up in the morning, I'm loving doing this. And so if it was pure business and everybody wants dry rum and we make dry rum, I'd be sad, because I want to be able to preserve these traditions. I showed you some of these documents because I think they're really interesting. And then so people get to choose. There's another whole debate about, we could talk about sugar for a long time, but I think there's a lot of other debates about the type of barrels, the type of wood for the barrels. This is another debate. We talked about the stills. That's another very important debate. We talked about the type of water that is used. It's another debate. So all these things are important because they allow the producers to make products that show diversity and excitement. When you get to drink a product that, when you taste blind, is delicious, I think the producer that is making it has done a good job. And in the end, we forget that we make these products not to just, talk about it and read about it, but we make these products to just enjoy drinking them. This is the enjoyment, and the experience is very important. And as a producer, I feel it is my duty to do this, to say, okay, we receive letters, we receive emails. Hundreds of people who said, keep at it. We love what you're doing. And that's very satisfying. It's like a bartender, who's somebody comes to him and he's making a drink, or to her, and she's being told, I love what you're doing. This is encouraging to something you believe in. So in the end of the day, it's about making delicious products. And if it's done, remember, with the principles being transparent, that's important. But you don't want to be in a situation where you have your hands tied. I give you an example. Wood. We didn't talk about wood, and wood is very important. Barrels. Do you allow just oak barrel, or do you allow wood barrel? Right? That's also two different points that we are in disagreement with certain people. You probably guess which side I stand on, obviously, right? I've experienced in my life, and my team and I, with 15 type of woods: chestnut, acacia, mulberry, amborana, etc. And it's fascinating. Now, what are we doing here? We're digging back into the 19th century of practices of wood. Well, people gave it up because the 20th century, I find, has been a century where a lot of things have been standardized about spirit making. If you look at the way spirit were done in the 19th century, was fascinating, and all this diversity that was there. And after the Great Recession, you tend to have a standardization of certain of the production. And for me as a producer, I love digging back into, when we make the curacao, for example, we're digging back, and people could say, no, you cannot make curacao like this. It's only blue. Curacao is blue because these 30 past years or 40 past years, curacao was only blue. So suddenly I'm being told, no, curacao is blue because for 40 years, curacao is blue. This is a fact.
It used to be green curacao too.
Well,
you need to bring some green back.
Yeah, but so for me, the fact that because curacao was blue for the 40 past years doesn't make blue curacao right.
Sure.
For me, so what do? We work with an historian, Day One Rich, and we dig back about making curacao, and we look at the type of oranges, the way it was infused, the way it was distilled, and we made Pierre Ferrand dry curacao. And so, should that be forbidden just because the 40 past years curacao was blue? No, I don't think so. I think this is, if it's delicious, if it's transparent, if it's made, we say, no, we're not putting blue number one in our curacao. We're transparent, it's there. And then we're making a product that I thought, as a producer, was fascinating to make, was really interesting. And we have hundreds of people who love this curacao, thousands of people who love that curacao. So thank you.
Great.
So I think it's the same when you look at the wood. Wood is another example just like this. A lot of spirits in the old days used not just only oak, and we're only scratching. That's my next book after History of Grand Champagne. I'm working on a book about the different type of wood barrels that were used for spirit making, rum, but also cognac, which, as you know, is the two spirits, aged spirits that I work with. And I'm finding fascinating things. I'm finding the work of a gentleman called Mr. Sandeman. Mr. Sandeman was a trader for brandy and for, as you know, port. And he's talking about cognac aged in a chestnut barrel. Or we find documents where you see, rum, that the barrels were fixed with different type of woods as well. And I say, that's fascinating. And for the past 10 years, we've been working with these different woods, these different barrels. And you always find guys that are as passionate. And, I'm very good. I love this thing. I've been doing it for 30 years. You find the guys that are as passionate as we are, that are barrel makers. And you go to see them and it's like, what about acacia? And yeah, my grandfather taught me how to use with acacia. We're going to make barrels with acacia. And then what about cherry? Not a sherry like the drink, but a cherry tree. And you make a barrel with cherry, a cherry tree, and it's just delicious. And the one for sure that's also delicious is chestnuts. So some of these barrels were of course forbidden because they were forgotten with standardization.
Sure.
And shouldn't we be allowed to revisit this? I mean, why people probably gave up chestnuts? There's one reason, I think, and that's my finding, is chestnuts is what we call a thirsty wood. When you put a spirit in it, usually, the wood is 3.5% is absorbed in the wood, classically, right? Chestnut will be like 5%. So a lot of people say, you know what, these 2%, I'd rather sell them. But, it happens to make delicious spirits. So I do think that on that aspect about the wood barrel, we should allow these traditional woods that have been used for spirits to be able to be re-explored. Because think about it, in the old days, people made barrel with the trees that worked. And so it was hardwood very often, all the time. And they allow you as a master blender to create these intricacies and these beautiful products. I brought a rum here for you to try if you want that has spent sometimes in an Amburana barrel. So we're very careful. We don't use a lot of Amburana because we want to make sure woods are sustainable. We have a certificate. We use very, very, very small amount. But I'm experiencing about it because it's a tropical wood, and rum being a tropical product, I think it's interesting to test and to taste what it works with. And I think that's a very important aspect, that we safeguard these possibilities to do this.
Sure.
So what do you think the fundamental disconnect is? Because it would appear that, and from what I'm being told from you can guess who, the collective of Jamaican distilleries and the collective of Barbadian distilleries, basically the places that you hold properties there as well, they seem to not be on the same page with you. What do you think? Is it just because you are an outsider? Is it just because there's not enough historical precedence? What do you feel the disconnect is when it seems like you're fighting an uphill battle?
Well, when you talk about West Indies Rum Distillery is run by 70 wonderful people. We didn't bring somebody from another country. They run the distillery. I work with them 1 week I'm just back from Barbados. I work 1 week every month with the team, and that's their firm belief. They've been distilling since 1893. We have archives. Some of these documents are in a vault in the archives on site. It's been the longest continuous, distillation, the distillery that has not stopped, since 1993. So this is much bigger. I have a grandfather who always told me, I grew up on a vineyard, and he said, Alexander, you don't own a vineyard. You tend a vineyard. So I don't own West Indies Rum Distillery. We tend a West Indies Rum Distillery. So we are in a situation where we have a team with certain beliefs, and we're discussing. And I think that's really important. So about the woods, for example, you were talking about Foursquare earlier. I think they have a very nice distillery. They've been distilling for 21 or 22 years. And they have developed certain opinions in this 21 or 22 years of distilling. This is their history for distilling. Before, they were buying rum from West Indies Rum Distillery. Mm-hmm. So I think everybody is entitled to have an opinion there. And we're not trying to say, they're distilling just for 20 years. They're not entitled. We're not saying this. We think they do good rum. We think they can be at that table and discuss with them, with us, the same way that the team at West Indies Rum Distillery has a valid point to discuss. So I think this is bigger than us. This is something that we have to be careful that we can live with for many, many years to come. So when I was talking about the wood, for example, that's a very, very important point, because as you know, when you age spirits, the wood and the barrels are very important. Why right now, 99.999%, it is true, since Prohibition, why rum has been aged in bourbon barrels? Well, you know why?
They're cheap. They're used.
They're not expensive. They cost about secondhand $120, and thank you. And there's a lot of them, and I respect that as well. By the way, we buy some and we use them. But if you're willing, we use cognac barrels. Well, they cost new 700 euros. So, am I just crazy and masochistic buying a barrel at $700 or 700 euros? No, because we think that extra expenditure is interesting and is important. I think that's why that we are actually want to keep the possibility to have this diversity. And I want to be able here for the rum fanatics to say, okay, this one is in a cognac barrel, this one is in a chestnut barrel, and this one is, again, transparency. I'll tell you what it is. Why are we willing to spend $10, $20, $20, $100, $200, $1,000 more to make these rums? Is because we think they make very interesting rum. And I'm not trying to say, I'm never going into the battle. I think the rum producers should really get together on this, to say that this diversity is what makes rum beautiful. Because you may like that rum and say, oh, you know what? I tasted that rum and it was aged in a bourbon barrel. but I actually tasted from the same distillery, and it was made in a chestnut barrel. So bourbon being American oak, right?
Sure.
White oak, and Quercus Alba. But you say, I've tasted it in a chestnut barrel. And you know what? That's crazy. That's really interesting. We're having a lot of fun doing this as producers. We think and we see a lot of consumers coming to us and being very interested in this, and we rejoice about that. And that's why you see us being a little bit angular on this. I would think it would be giving up a lot of culture. And I do agree since Prohibition, because they're cheap, everybody went with them. But because there's these old techniques that were back then, we think we should be able to re-explore them to make beautiful rum.
Let me push back on you a little bit. A couple points. You point out specifically, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible here. You point out specifically that you notice that people are buying it, so therefore we should explore it. That makes the argument, and not to crap all over Fireball, but lots of people buy Fireball. It doesn't mean it should be called whiskey. You know what I'm saying? Like I am not. What I'm saying is that you have a specific prerogative or a financial interest in stuff that would sell, regardless of whether or not some would feel it needs to be included in the GI.
Well, I mean, so you're saying to me, I'm just trying to understand
Sure.
that we're going to spend 2 or 3 times more for a barrel to make a rum that we think is beautiful. We're going to use a cognac barrel, we're going to use a chestnut barrel to make this rum. And you think because we're doing this, not because we just want to get poor in the process.
For the record, I don't think this. I'm just trying to clarify
thank you
some of the
very much.
opposition.
But you know why I'm reacting like this?
Sure.
And you guys know me. I'm really passionate. I believe in this. I'm doing this because I love it. If I wanted to make more money, I just use 100% bourbon barrels that cost $120 secondhand. There's nothing wrong with them. They make beautiful rum, but we think it's fascinating to be able to do this. And you find guys that are very interested to be able to rediscover these old techniques. To say, I'm going to try this rum because we've used that technique right now. I work with a lot of master blender and master distillers. There's a guy I really like to work with is Alex Chatko, the master distiller and the master blender at Teeling. And Alex and I, we swap barrels, and he's done, and I've worked with different type of wood for barrels. And I've learned a lot from Alex, and I'd like to think that, we taught each other a lot. And Irish whiskey, for example, allows the use of different type of woods. And so we're going the extra mile by rebuilding this barrel, by exploring these type of aging, by reconnecting by old tradition before standardization was out there. We're reconnecting with this history, and we think it's fascinating, and and we think it tastes delicious. I don't know if you tried some of the expressions.
I've gone through quite the gamut. If you just go over to Dox's house, he's got 2 things at his house, and it's basically rum and Disney characters. But the going back to the disconnect then, so if you feel and listen, I don't think anyone can argue that you're not passionate, but if you are so passionate and you're trying to dig into the history and recreate these things, because that happens in beer, right? Everyone knows Dogfish. They did that. Dogfish Head did that old world's oldest recipe of beer, the Midas Touch.
Midas Touch.
Yeah, they went back and found some ingredients literally dried out into an old clay pot and tried to recreate the beer from that. So I get that connection.
So you think that should be forbidden?
No, I don't. I'm saying if
but they haven't done it for the 50 past years.
If you seem so passionate and it seems to be a hobby of passion, then what do you think the disconnect is when everyone else on the island that doesn't work for you feels the opposite? But those who, obviously, I'm not discounting the opinions, but obviously anytime you find out someone works for someone whose official stance is this, they have a family to feed, they've got a financial obligation. What do you think the disconnect is between those who oppose you and what you're trying to allow to happen?
Well, it's a bit the story of the life of myself and my team. We love to move the needle. I think it's exciting it's very satisfying to do this research and share it with people who love this, who have a similar passion. When I find something, I have some friends, I call them, I'm going to shock you again.
Okay.
We discovered in the vault at the distillery at West Indies, that I don't know anybody here is a distiller or does or does beer. We discovered that they were using a minute amount of seawater in the fermenting vat, right? So we're reading this, so you can imagine all the all the hell that we'll raise, right, because of this. And I'm calling a friend of mine called Dave Wondrich. I like to blow his mind by historical facts that we find, right? I say, Dave, what about seawater in fermentation? And usually he goes, wow, that's great, whatever. Or he calls me the same way. And he's like, yeah. I said, what? Yeah. He said, I know. So you know? And he said, but I don't know what it tastes like because it hasn't been done for a while. So it seems that in some islands, they were using a little bit of seawater or a little sea salt, very small amount. So we have a guy working in my team, and we analyzed what has happened. It creates a certain environment for yeast to develop differently. Now, when you distill, the salt doesn't go through. You guys all know that, right? Salt is a heavier compound, but it has created an environment for yeast to develop differently. It hasn't been done for 80 years. We think West Indies rum distillery, I don't know if some of you have tasted some of the people called the Rock Label, was actually the Greg Farm, the one I brought samples with. They had some of very, like a briny effect. We think that was this method. We're not sure, but when we tasted, we worked it and we distilled with it. And yes, everybody got shocked. I mean, I shocked a lot of people like this, and maybe I shocked you. And I'm sorry for this. But when I read this and I make a rum and it's delicious, I want to be able to continue to make it. It's there. It's not because we didn't do it for 30 years, where there was a certain standardization that we should give up for away. I think Dogfish Head is a very good example. I went to see him, actually. When my wife goes on vacation, we go on vacation, she makes sure there's no distillery in a 50-kilometer radius. And we were in Delaware, and I looked, and, on the beach, I get bored very, 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 very fast. And I see Dogfish Head, just a few miles away. So I called Sam, and we knew of each other's, right? We didn't know each other's, but we knew of each other's. He said, come over. So I said, there's going to be my mother-in-law. You have to. So he gave her the caps. She was so happy. And so we got to really talk about the research that he did. And you know what? We felt like kindred spirits. And yes, it's true. What he did with these old things were not done for the 50 past years and so on, but he's allowed to do it. And it's wonderful. And he can call it beer.
Everything that's happened in American beer in the past 50 years has been... it seems like every corner has been hit. We've got to take another break. We'll have one more segment after this. I want to invite Wade up in a second to ask about some compromises in the next segment. When this is all said and done and this GI comes to pass and everything is settled, what do you prioritize? Meaning, if you have to give up something, would it be the different types of wood? Would it be? I'll let Wade ask. So we'll be right back after this segment, and we'll go from there. All right. Welcome back. Before we took a break, we kind of mentioned a compromise. As all these things are being brought up for the GI in the Caribbean, we're trying to figure out what we want to keep, what we don't want to keep. And my big question, ultimate question, is about compromise. And actually, that's going to be Wade's question. Wade, if you want to go ahead and come up, wherever you are, go ahead and ask.
Hi, Alexandre.
Hello, Wade.
I'm a longtime fan. We've known each other for a while. I love your passion that you bring to this.
Oh, here we go.
You're called the Renegade for a reason. I love what you bring to what you've done for Cognac and the Renegade series. And so, but obviously there's 3 other producers on the Barbados island that's working toward a GI, and they all kind of agree on what it should be. And you're this one renegade out there that wants to do something different. I understand that. But at the end of the day, is there a compromise that can be reached? I know you're very passionate about the chamber still. I love hearing you talk about that. What if we include letting you use whatever still you want to make your rum in Barbados, but you compromise to say, if it's Barbados rum on the front label, that no dosage is allowed?
Well,
or the wood as well. You're willing to allow wood?
Let me start with the first negotiating point before we throw it in a second.
I mean, to me, it's bigger than us. This is about rum for the many years to come. And I think what we're doing now is going to be looked upon for the many years to come. The way I look at people who've done the regulation in 1945 in other regions, I'm looking at them very harshly sometimes. And sometimes very, very, very humbly. And I don't want the kids or the grandkids to say, these guys, they compromise. I think we need to do something, the way I look at this, something that includes these traditions. So it's not one producer against the other, because it's that everyone that is making rum, I have respect for everybody making rum on both Jamaica and Barbados. Jamaica is a bit of a different situation. You were talking about people working for me and things like this. You should really meet them. You should meet Andrew, who runs West Indies Rum Distillery. The minute Andrew is not going to be agreeing with what we do, he's so passionate. You should meet him about what we're doing. This is the kind of man. He's a manager. He can find a job anytime and anywhere he wants in Barbados. So this is not about like having a job and doing this. And if you know him and you spend time with him, you will understand. And I think some of you have been to Barbados. You will prove me right on this. This is not a job for him. This is a passion. I'm going to your question, Wade. This is not like an arm deal or something like that we're doing, and we're not buying a car or something like this. This is something about making rum right.
Yeah, but
and
the other producers feel the exact same way, and they bring some valid points to the table. Sure. So I'm just trying to think, there's got to be a way to get you guys to the table to negotiate, to really come up with a GI that we can all live with. So there's got to be some compromise.
There's an old saying, you can be happy or you can be right. Like, you can't necessarily... Are you going to fight to the end for all these things, or is there a middle ground somewhere?
If you fight to the end, it's just never going to happen. There's not going to be a GI.
What I believe is that we should make a GI that's an inclusive GI, meaning that it is not one producer but against the other, but each producer can continue to do what they believe in.
Well, nobody is stopping you from making a rum the way you want it to be made. If you want to add this dosage to it, but we're just saying that you can, on the front label of the product, call it Barbados rum. You can call it plantation rum. It's plantation rum.
But you cannot say this, because that's, to me, we are in Barbados to make Barbados rum. We're not in Barbados to make some kind of other rum, right?
In this case, I think the argument was rum liqueur is what they're wanting.
Well, that's really, I will never, of course, accept that, because rum liqueur, first of all, is a category that doesn't exist, that has never existed. People who say rum liqueur exists, there's no such a category of rum liqueur, and the word liqueur applies to 100 grams. So
there are examples of rum liqueurs that came from Jamaica, say 1930s, things like that were simply sweetened rum. There's a 17-year Ray and Nephew that is a rum liqueur. I believe that was the rum used by Trader Vic to create the Mai Tai. So there is a historical rum liqueur that is a thing.
Even within your own brand, there is a historical precedence. Renegade 2 could not be called cognac simply because of the wood you used, but I would imagine that in some cases, some brands are worried how it would affect sales, but Renegade 2 is a huge success, not being labeled cognac. Are you worried that it would simply affect sales, or are you just worried that it wouldn't be doing justice to your product?
You understand what you're saying. You're saying that we're making a cognac going back to the roots of cognac making, and we cannot call it cognac.
Because of their GI.
Yeah, and I'm saying... And it has to be a peaceful discussion. This is something actually Cognac is doing the right way right now. Is that every producer is looking at it. We're doing experiments and we're looking at it and we're reconsidering it. So I understand what you're saying, but in this, it's about finding a GI where people can continue doing what they believe in as long as it is honest and transparent. We agree to a certain point. The fact that if it's from Barbados, has to be distilled and fermented and distilled in Barbados. There's some elements that we believe in. And then, but we want to be able to do this. And that's just like not me saying, this is a whole team believing in this. And so we're going to have to talk a lot about this to find what we can do so the producers are respected in the way of what they're doing now. Now, somebody's saying, yeah, you can be in Barbados, but you cannot call your rum Barbados because you're doing something that has some historical validity. It's something that doesn't make sense for somebody who is in Barbados. Go and tell the 70 guys that work in West Indies Rum Distillery who are born in Barbados, raised in Barbados, that they're going to make Mayo rum and they're going to be denied the rum. I'm speaking in their name because this is what they're telling me every single day. We are Bayesian, and we've been making rum, and we've been supplying the supplier of rum for all the brands that exist right now that are Bains at one point. Yeah, West Indies Rum Distillery at one point in the history. And we want to be able, not by some magic, there's a big discussion right now about should rum be only aged in Barbados or should double aging continue? Now, 350 years of rum history is about double aging. You have here a chart that we put there is what happens in a barrel when it's being shipped. And this is a scientific fact. We cannot deny this. It's a scientific fact. This is also a historical fact. Thank you. For 350 years. And suddenly we're being told, no, let's reverse history. And you are the renegade, because you want to keep that as a possibility. Now, somebody comes and say we should make rum tropical aging, which is a more recent expression in the history of rum making, right? This, there's no oak trees, going that we know of growing in the Caribbean, so it's a more recent expression of it. But we're being open to this.
We'll give you the wood barrels you want to use. We'll give you the stills that you want to use. We'll give you European aging allowed. But let's negotiate on the one point. I think majority of us rum geeks kind of agree on that. We don't want to see in Barbados rum.
Yeah. So let me, before you answer, I'll add a caveat. There was a tweet. There was something that came in that said, question from Jason Green. Do you, and this is tangential to Wade's point, do you feel that if you didn't add dosage, that it wouldn't taste good? Meaning, is it our Jamaica, I think, is fantastic. No complaint. We did a private barrel with you guys. It was no dosage Jamaican, and again, no complaints. Loved it. Do you feel that? And you often do expressions without dosage.
I have no problem with it.
Do you feel that it's something you have to have no matter what?
To me, it's an heritage of rum that we cannot accept to erase. This is something we cannot say. It's like double aging. It's like, to me, it's part of the patrimony of rum. And I don't want to revise history. And that's why I think we're arguing this. And this is like not me saying, this is a whole team believing this. And that's why we're discussing this.
Do you feel that just because it's historical, that it's necessarily good? I mean, there's a things that are historically happened that weren't necessarily good. I don't know about you guys, but in America, we've got something that's kind of hanging on our backs a little bit for the last couple hundred years, just because it historically happened.
Yeah, we're talking about the way rum is made, and I believe it makes delicious rum, and a lot of people that are our customers believe it's delicious rum. So suddenly we're gonna be told, oh, no, you don't do it anymore. And we have a lot of people that we don't want to let down, that believe in what we do, and we make these rums that we feel and are delicious. So yes, we want to be able to continue to do this for sure. And to us, that's important. The same way with double aging, we discussed about that. And these are points that are really crucial to us. But what I answer to this is to say, once you have an inclusive GI, this is to me the only way that we respect one another in our techniques. Somebody was saying earlier, I'm not here to tell you how you make your rum. Don't tell me how I make my rum. Just we are honest about doing this rum, so let's be transparent. I think the key is transparency. I've never tried.
I agree with that. I like your new labels that list on the back everything about the product.
You're extremely transparent.
And I would like to see that continue on all the labels.
Yeah. And I think other producers should do it with the caramel, should do it with the, and we are going to go on with the calories as well. I think this is important. I think the consumer should know. But once we have this, when this transparency is there, we should be able to continue to live on with some of these traditions and expression. I think that's really important. And I don't want to be the guy, or my team, that we don't want to be. I mean, you speak, Andrew, next time I really want you to speak, because he's the one. When we go, there's a couple of things I say, Andrew, what do you think about this? Very, other elements, for example, size of barrels, and that's a whole different debate. And Andrew is like, Alexander, we got that heritage. I'm Bayesian. I'm born here. We got guys like Digger and so on. They've been at the distillery for 41 years before 2 of the 4 distilleries didn't exist. This gentleman has been making rum at this distillery.
And he's in support of.
Yeah, and we got John Kinch, we got guys who are there. We got Andrew who runs the distillery. We have Don Ben who's been with the distillery for 20 years as well. And he goes to some of these meetings and they're saying, Alexander, we cannot deny this heritage of making rum. So for us, I think the best way, and I'm saying that, is going to be to continue discussing in this and finding something where each producer can continue to do what he believes is right, provided it's honest and transparent. Remember, the age on the label should be the minimal age. It's fermented and distilled in the country that it's claimed to. That all of this are important.
How do we find? So, plantation rum was one of the first rums that opened me up to rum.
The category, agreed.
It is I hate to use the word gateway rum, but it really is a gateway rum. It's something that you can give to a consumer that isn't a Martinique rum, that isn't a Dunder Jamaica rum. It's something that
has a pirate on the front of it.
It's something that you can give a consumer that has a seriousness about it. And it really opens them up to all the different expressions that you have. I believe and we practice that people should drink what they want. If they like rums that are sweetened, they like rums that are sweetened. And we're not going to try to steer them a different direction. But I'll have to give you a perspective. And my perspective is from a bartender. Everyone that comes in here, the first thing they ask is it too sweet? And there's an idea that rum is sweet. And we have to kind of walk them through it and say, well, no, rum is not sweet. No spirits are sweet. Sugar that's added to rum is sweet. And so we get in this kind of dilemma where, well, plantation is sweet. And so I want to turn people on to new rums, but I don't know how or where to describe the two. I have one rum on one side that's very sophisticated. I'm not saying yours that has sugar in it is not sophisticated. It's just as sophisticated. It's just different, right?
Thank you.
And so how do we, when they're sitting on the shelf together, how do we make the statement? How do we tell the consumer this one has sugar added, this one does not?
Well, this is, I believe that whether you are at production or whether you are as a consumer, I believe key is education.
Sure.
Access to pleasure is education. Thank you, Wade. We believe that that's why great bartenders are very important.
Right.
Barmaid or barman, to just educate. I believe that access to pleasure is not easy. Access to making beautiful rum is not easy. You need years to practice. You need generations to practice things. So I believe that there's no little gimmick that's going to make it easy because, great things are hard. There's no little, to make a great rum is a lot of work.
Sure.
And I think to enjoy and to explain rum is also fascinating because there's so many facets.
Yes.
To me, the idea is to say,
I like it so much.
And that's why we all like it so much, right? Mm-hmm. I fell in love some 30 years ago with rum, technically, because what blew me away is that this diversity of cultures of taste. I mean, imagine rum is very humbling when you see the way, and I would love us instead to talk about the diversity, the technical, what is a muck pit, what is, all these techniques that I've learned, but very humbling to me. And that's, to me, is rum. We can have that discussion about sugar on and off, but there's the beauty, the intrinsic beauty of rum is about that diversity.
Right.
So what you are talking about plantation. Yes, we have certain expressions that are where we use sugar in it, and we don't go overboard. We think that it's the heavier rum, so when you use it, you shouldn't feel the sugar. If you start feeling the sugar, that is the dominant element, I think it is not working. It should be. So if you use a thin rum and you add sugar in it, it feels sweet. If you use what we call a really substantial rum with a lot of flavor elements that are delicious and sophisticated, it makes it, even more. It delivers, it's a scientific fact, by the way, it delivers certain elements of the taste. And I want to keep that possibility, that technical possibility for certain expressions, because rum is not simple. There is, you ask a question, is there like a little gimmick that I could say, rum is this and that's what it is? And I'm saying, I'm sorry to tell you, there's no gimmick like this, because the beauty of rum, there's not one answer about rum. And I would like people to, and my dream is that we could be saying, and that's why the transparency is and the education is very important, is to say, okay, there's rum that use dosage, people rum are using no dosage, and this is what they are doing. Taste both. What do you think? I think there should be a limit. I think Europe has gone with the 20 grams limit. I think it's really good, because at 20 grams, this is not a lot. And, we could...
They just lowered the limit, right?
Sorry?
They just lowered the limit?
No, it's not that. Europe had no limit before.
Oh, okay.
They
They
said
just put a
rum,
limit on it.
sugar
Okay.
can be added to, many spirits. Remember,
technically,
Calvados,
lowered the limit.
Armagnac, and all
Sure.
very, very traditional
From
spirits,
infinite to-
including rum. I've been using it forever. So,
Right.
just suddenly we're going to revise this total history doesn't make sense to me. So what we need to do is, Wade was mentioning that about it earlier, is that transparency effect is very important. So as you as a bartender, can say, hey, this is this rum, this is how it's made. This is made with molasses. This is made from that island. This one has a little bit of dosage.
This one has
This one
everything
has
in
no
it.
dosage. So I think that's really great, because then the consumer can say, hey, let me try both. I'm going to have them side by side. I love when people do, you taste our Barbados, for example, the Grand Reserve or the 5-year, and then you can compare, and you can have the Jamaica, and you say, okay, you got two different terroirs. One is like this, one's like, the one has a little bit dosage, the one doesn't have any dosage. And my dream is that the person says, you know what? I like both, because I do. If I put a rum out there, and if my team and I, we're a bunch of very passionate people, and if we put a rum out there, it's that we believe in it. So to me, the answer is there's no gimmick to it. It's education. It's the possibility for you as a bartender to be out there and educate about this, and to say,
Sure.
okay, these guys do this. And I think the transparency thing will win. I think there's no way around it. Everybody's going to have to do this, and that
Yeah.
includes calories as well. So to me, that's the key, is that we're transparent. There's a limit to it, so nobody is doing like a syrup, not doing a liqueur. I have a problem with the word.
Sure.
Liqueur there is a regulation about liqueur. It's 100 grams or more.
Right.
This is not what we're talking about.
Right.
I mean, if we want to be professional about this, we have to call a spade, right? So this is not a rum liqueur, or, first of all, the category doesn't exist anymore, so we'd have to recreate it, and then it would be from 100 grams and higher, and that's not what we're talking about. So
Sure.
we're talking about rum.
Would you be okay with mandatory label of dosage amounts? I know that you at times have been transparent and people have looked it up and have talked about it, but would you be okay with labeling changes that would require full expression? Because, so great example of transparency is you have this great bottle right in front of me, this Jamaican 2005. Mentions the distilleries, 12 years old, 1 year, in the Ferrand casks, which I imagine would be in France. So continental aging is broken down separate from tropical aging. You've got almost everything on here. Would you be, if they change label requirements to include dosage exact amounts, milligrams per liter, or I guess more specifically per 750, whatever, would you be okay with the changes
that
in
was
regulation?
our proposal. Our proposal in different. That's our proposal, not only in GI discussions, because this is bigger. This is something about rum, is to be transparent, and we all agree to put dosage, caramel, calories, and where it's made from, and so on. I think that's important. I hear a lot of people that want this, and I including my family. We believe in this. I think everybody should be doing this, and it should be the same about caramel, by the way. So I not only agree with it, but we propose about that, and that should be part of the label as we reprint our label. It's on all the new labels. You've seen it with all the different, black barrel, the single cast, the black label here that we put it, because these are labels that we reprint every year. So we put it on there. So yes, it's a good proposal. That would be, I think, a compromise that everybody should apply. And we have proposed that to say, again, be transparent. Let me know. And I think that's very important. Mm-hmm. But I love your question. This is a crucial question, because that's what draws people to rum. Is that diversity that you can have. And it's like, the heavy rum, the lighter rum, the ones that are, got more superior alcohol, so more chocolatey, the ones that are, you got more esters. And so all this, if that's on the label, that's kind of fun I think, fun in
for the nerd,
very serious guy.
Agreed, yeah.
But even for, somebody says, Jamaica, you got that the pot still Jamaica, you guys tried I'm very proud of the Jamaica Special Dry, which, we did, that's 100% pot still. And you do have the ester level that's boosted. And so you got these specific level of ripe fruit and so on. So you can explain to somebody that doesn't have to be a super nerd to say, actually, they do it in a very specific way. And let me tell you what it tastes like.
I tell consumers, guests and such that if they don't put information that's very specific on their label, they're not proud of what's in the bottle. So having information and saying and describing the singularity of this rum as versus of, a half a paragraph, oh, it was made here, we take pride in that. I mean, that's really really pushes your brand, I think, to the forefront as far as that goes. But, the average consumer is not going to read the back of the label.
But again, remember your question. Great things are not easy. It's about education. So why we have great bartenders, I think there's been in America something incredible that has happened, is with great bartenders, barmaid, barman that are there. They're so passionate about what they do. And it's a learning curve.
Right.
We're going to know more and more. There's more and more. You should see the emails I received, the question, the people were fascinated to learn more. And I'm sure you see it behind the bar. There's a great bar.
Oh,
here.
Yeah.
So you got all these questions and you can educate.
Consumers come a long way.
And then these guys are going to know and they're going to teach the others.
Right.
And I think it's very important we are inclusive of these methods because that diversity is preserved. It's at one point, and that's kind of done right now, there was a discussion, is rum made from juice, is superior or inferior, is rum made from molasses, and so on. I don't know if you remember this, that dates me a little bit. There was a big debate with one that was better than the other. You want my point of view? I love both.
Sure.
And I want both to be out there. And somebody could say, let's simplify it and we're only going to make it one way. But no, rum should be made with...
So besides distillation levels, though, which you mentioned earlier, I say, where's the line? You say up to a certain point, what's the point? But where's the line? Where's the cutoff? How do you preserve and protect heritage while embracing creativity when essentially what it's... And I may be misconstruing your words, but essentially what you're saying is I'd like anything to be possible, almost, right? Not implied, but like where's the line?
I feel like that also
where's the specific line?
I feel like that also with diversity. I see both sides of the argument, and I understand if the rules are wide open, the diversity will go away.
No,
but if Martinique all of a sudden said you don't have to make rum from sugarcane juice anymore and started making from molasses, well, it wouldn't be Martinique rum anymore. And they could very easily say, oh, yeah, we want to stop growing sugarcane because bananas are worth more than sugarcane. But they don't. They actually have a subsidy to keep the sugarcane growing, and they keep that tradition going. And that's the diversity that's in rum, is that in Martinique, they have very restrictive laws. In Cuba, their laws are very restrictive. I see... Like I said, I see both sides of the argument. I fear if we leave something open for interpretation and we leave something open to innovation, we're going to lose that heritage that these people have fought to keep.
I think there's a middle ground, which is more my question. I think there's definitely a middle ground to allow some of that historical. I like the idea of different woods. I like the idea of different techniques, different stills. I love that. But where's the line? Besides that, can you use, like recently they had the issue with Scotch barrels, right? They argued, can we do a tequila finish? And the Scotch Whiskey Association said, no, you can't do a tequila finish. And then that conversation comes up of like, well, where's the line? Where is the line for you? Richard specifically mentioned the line for him as far as finishing goes is or secondary maturation in X barrel, whether it be X bourbon, X sherry, X Madeira, X sugar water. I hope that wasn't disrespectful. I didn't mean it that way. But X dosage, the line for him is a previous spirit that has a GI. So for him, his argument was, and what he was saying is that the rest of Barbados agrees with him, is if it's something that has a previous protected category that can be used, that's the line. So if it's sherry, if it's Madeira, these things are they're protected. There's things in place to protect those. So for him, dosage is outside that category. For him, that's the line. So I guess if you're arguing for that, which I guess you can definitely make the argument that because it's from the sugarcane, there's a connection there. I get it. My ultimate question is, where's the line? Can we have a beer barrel rum, as we talked about with the Dogfish Head thing. Can we do beer barrel finishing? Can we do? Where's the line?
Well, first of all, when you say that anything should be possible, trying to say what I think, it's a total misunderstanding about what plantation is about and what we stand for. I mean, there's total misinterpretation. We don't believe that anything should be possible. We explain very clearly. I mean, we have all the principles explained. I can go through all of them again. There's like 4 very strong principles that, rum is made with cane, rum is, etc. The age on the label is there. When you claim an origin, rules of origin is very important. The rules of origin are very different from one spirit to the other. You probably know. In the CARICOM, there's something nobody talks about. There's a rules that exist already about rum. There's CARICOM rules of rum, Caribbean Community rules of rum. Mm-hmm. So the country of origin is not where it is distilled. It is where it is aged. A lot of spirits, that's what it is.
Right.
It is where it's fermented and distilled.
Right.
That's not anything goes. That's I just want to be very clear and firm about this, because we cannot be lenient and we cannot just say things, that are just that, it is about allowing, things that are clear and transparent, that are rooted in history, to be able to be done. So that's what we're talking about, right? So, and also being done in a transparent way. So we talk about this. And then after, it's finding that common ground. And I like Wade's point, is like, because it raises an issue as how we're going to compromise, or try and find a way that, as long as it is got some history validity to it, and that it makes sense. I mean, sugar, rum is made in countries that produce sugar for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. For hundreds of years.
Right.
If you speak to the team at West Indies Rum Distilleries, they're proud of they call it the culture of the cane.
Right.
They grew up in cane fields, mm-hmm. and they are. It's about it's about sugar and rum. Now, as you know, somebody was talking with me saying sugar industry is in trouble now in the Caribbean. I dream of that day that we would go back, so eating very little sugar but super high grades. And I dream of that day, these would be the types of sugars that would be used also to make rum for dosage. That would be these, what we call strike A sugars.
I would love to make a Jamaican rum old fashioned with Jamaican sugar.
Yeah.
I would love to do that.
But there's sugar and sugar. There's strike A sugars. That's
sure.
The sugars that are made that there's a lot of impurities. That's a lot of taste that comes from. And the strike A, the French called sirop de batterie. They're very, mm-hmm. very intense, and they're liquid and delicious. Invite you to taste them. And that's part of the heritage. So, no, I really, you make me react here by saying everything goes. I totally disagree with this.
Let me clarify, because it wasn't meant as an insult. What I mean is,
I don't take it as an insult.
Just making sure.
I'm saying this is not what we believe in. We believe. Look, I live a week in every month in Barbados and 3 weeks in Cognac. Believe me, not everything goes.
Let me shape that a little bit. So if let's just say I didn't say everything goes. I'm asking specifically where the line. Are you saying that if you can find some historical precedents for, if you have an idea, let's say you want to make something that's a beer barrel matured wine, an ex-stout that aged a beer for 2 years, which is an extremely long time for a beer, but let's just throw it out there. And in order to do that, you would have to find some historical precedents, or are you saying, woods, right? Even if it's not
I love your question, by the way, because, it's one that's going to be provocative again on what I say. Rum aged in a beer barrel. I'm interested to try it.
What about sriracha that's aged in a beer barrel? Could you not? You see where I'm saying? If you take anything that spends time in a barrel, there's some people who age pickles in a barrel.
No. To me, it's
where's the line?
It's a spirit, a wine, or okay. Thank you. I understand because I really didn't have any clue what was your question.
Right.
You cannot use a harangue. You want to use a spirit, or it's so obvious to me, and I apologize.
Sure.
You want to use, of course, beer, wine, or spirits. And that have not been. Flavored, like it's, and I think, I don't know if you saw the rules of Scotch whiskey. They have clarified that point, I think, in a very interesting way in their regulation recently. But again, so to me, that should be the line.
There's a local brewery. Sorry to interrupt you. There's a local brewery that did a barrel aged stout with 25 pounds of Lucky Charms marshmallows.
Mm-hmm.
would that be allowed?
No.
You see what I'm saying? So
No,
there's
because marshmallows are not a spirit. They're
Right.
not a wine, and they're not a, as
But-
far as I know.
does beer have a precedence in historical rum
I
aging?
mean, I don't have any documents showing to this. I'm very honest, as you know, but I'm still interested to explore it. For sure.
I imagine of course, you won't be able to find this, but I imagine there was all kinds of things. I mean, things were shipped in barrels.
You're right.
So,
That was exactly where I was going to.
I mean, it could be an oil barrel or something. I don't know.
well, let's not go that route.
But
my point
things
is
were shipped
simply-
in barrels. So barrels in the 1800s were barrels that they had. Not really like defined we can only use these barrels. Well, they only had Madeira barrels, or they only had
Don't undermine
the barrels
the
that they had.
people that knew what they were doing. They were not
Sure.
going to put rum into an oil barrel.
Well,
sure.
And
course. I'm just using
So
it as an
when we
example.
think, for us, it's using a spirit or a wine. And in a beer, I'm sure people tried also in beer barrels back then. I don't have any evidence right
So-
now. All the things we talked about, sugar and so on, we have many evidence. This, I don't have any evidence. So I'm not going to tell
Sure.
you. So I'm being very honest.
This is where the confusion comes in, and I think a lot of your stances. I don't find you incendiary. Every conversation I've ever had with you has been very level-headed and very calm and very nerdy. Like you've got a lot of inspiration behind you. You're not, in my opinion, someone that's inflammatory, but I think some people have a hard time grasping the limits or the full picture of what you say that may be the cause of some of the blowback in the community. I think even now, just having this conversation, I know that you weren't literally saying anything goes, but you paint a picture of the potential is unlimited, so to speak. And so it's really just trying to understand you more deeply. And unfortunately, we've kind of run out of time. But I feel like the vast majority of at least those listening and watching will get a much better picture of understanding you. I find you to be incredibly accommodating, and I appreciate you coming on the show. Is there anything else you want to add before we...
Yeah, for sure. I want to say something that's always been for me very important, is that what is the way we want to be remembered 100 years from now, what we are doing. I think this is very important because these spirits are much bigger than us. And I don't think if we just restrict them and try rum to be just like whiskey, and I have a lot of respect for whiskey. As you know, I have a lot of respect for cognac and other spirits. But we don't want rum at plantation and at West Indies Rum Distillery. We don't want rum to mimic another spirit. We want rum to be itself. That's the first thing I want to do. And I want to, I want to say, rum should really stay true to this heritage and this diversity, not mimic another spirit. The second point I have is about the way every producers and also everybody is engaging. I think we should work side by side as producers to explain what rum is about, to explain that diversity.
We're all in this together.
And we're all in this. Thank you. We're all in this together. And stop. Sometimes you will never see me taking pokes at other producers because I will. If you ask me personally, I will tell you what I think. But I think the negativity will hurt the beauty of rum. Rum is a very noble spirit with so much to offer. And the team and I were giving it all to make beautiful spirits. And provided it's done with transparency, I explain the three principles. Remember, A, the cane, B, the transparency, C, the heritage and the diversity, and D, leave room for innovation. Not just anything goes, just innovation that makes sense and that respects these three first principles. So to me, that's very important. But again, we're all in this together. And the way it goes negative on rum, every rum loses.
Yeah.
Every rum loses. And so I think that's so important. And if somebody wants to make rum with dosage, and we do it with some of our rums, we do it. You might decide you like it and you drink it. We have a lot of consumers that love it and they drink it. If you decide you don't like it, don't drink it.
Right.
And if you want a drier rum, if you like it, drink it. But you don't have to start going all negative, but just because you just disagree the way it's done. It's the same with champagne. There was a big debate, in champagne when people were doing Brut Zero. And as you know, champagne as using obviously dosage. And a Brut is 13 grams, for example, of sugar. And at one point there was, oh my God, it's like this, we're going to do Brut Zero. And the beauty of champagne is this diversity, where you have people doing Brut Zero, which are a no Dosage champagne, and they're delicious. And there's the champagne that have a little bit of what they call liqueur d'expédition, and they are delicious as well. And so to us, is that diversity and that education you are talking about. Thank God we have guys like you, and we have guys like a lot of great bars and great stores that can go and explain this. And they can say, there is plantation Jamaica Special Dry. This is what they were trying to show you. What do you think? And then there is the, Barbados, 5 years old, that's got a little bit of dosage, and it creates and brings forward certain flavors. Try it. And then that's the way I look at it, and that's the way we think it should be done. Is that tolerance where we're all in it together, where rum can win.
I know we're running out of time. I do want to ask one last question, Jack. I apologize. Would you be opposed, instead of rum liqueur, the difference of it being labeled sweet rum or dry rum?
No, sweet rum, it implies that you have a sweet taste. When you are below 20 grams, I always say, if you feel the sweetness hit you, it's not working. It's not about making it taste sweet. It's about bringing forward certain element of certain natural flavors of the rum. That's what we do when we're doing it. So it's not about being sweet. It's about bringing forward some elements. So if you say sweet rum, you're gonna think it's got to be very sweet. That's what it is. I believe the best way to this is to put a cap. Like Europe has done. I think they thought about this for 5 years before they came up with that. To put a cap so we don't have sweet rums, because sweet is when you go to heavy sugar in it, and they put a cap at what it is. So to me, again, transparency on the label, do what you say what you do.
Okay. I think that pretty much sums it up. I had one last question. I'll ask it off air. It's comical in nature, but I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you
this was
so
fantastic.
much.
Thank you, guys.
This is a huge honor. Thank you, Docs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. Appreciate it.